How the people are doing. So now you see, I believe both of these phones are some of the most expensive ones that you can buy right now, and I think they showed up at roughly similar prices, if I'm not wrong. Well, it's very close at the very least, so I think this comparison is about as apt as it can get. Also, there's another thing you'll notice in this very comparison. Both the S24 Ultra and the Pixel 9 Pro XL, they can have certain very odd weaknesses in there. I'm not saying it's a crime that they're not perfect, but yeah, there's some very odd problems. You'll know exactly what I'm talking about, and if you've actually seen the previous comparison I made for the Pixel against the Xiaomi 14 Ultra, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And secondly, if you are interested in that comparison, I haven't checked it out yet, well, the playlist is in the description. Actually, for both of these phones, if you're interested in the S24 Ultra, you can check it out as well. There's quite a lot of stuff going on for that. Now, kicking things off, very simple shot, nothing too crazy. And well, here's the deal. Both of these phones are processing a lot, but they're processing in very different ways. Because if you look at the Pixel, it has a lot of contrast, a lot of clarity, it is bringing out a lot of detail, but it's also letting the shadows be the shadows. Just look at the leaves behind me. On the S24 Ultra, however, it's just bringing all of the details out, and it does look very processed, very HDR-esque, but the issue that I have, if you look at some of the leaves in the upper part of the image and also right beside my face, there's a bit of a cutout action happening. There's a bit of a halo in there. Almost looks as if the sky is being cut out and then the colors are being handled separately. It's kind of how Photoshop is done, right? And that looks very unnatural. However, that's not always going to be the case, because the S24, it may be a little inconsistent, but it can produce exceptional results like in this one. So here, you see, it's a perfect shot on the S24, about as good as I can expect. It's a little too saturated on both phones, you know, that's just the way it is. I prefer slightly more muted, slightly more natural looking colors, but well, I'm not going to complain for either. The Pixel this time around actually does look a little bit too sharpened for my personal taste. The S24 on the other hand, it's producing a really perfect shot here. However, if you use the Expert RAW app, for some reason the 24 megapixel mode is hidden in there, and it's a bit of a cumbersome thing to use, and yeah, I decided to do this. Here I was praising the processing of the S24, and now the Expert RAW just completely muddled it up. There. But, well, the 24 megapixels, I just want to know if that actually makes a difference. Well, I guess, yeah, there's less sharpening on the S24, the detail level is pretty much the same. The Pixel, as I said previously, it does have more sharpening going on. But, to be honest, with the way the processing works in the Expert RAW app, I'm not a huge fan of it, so I wouldn't recommend it. But, you know, if this is what you really, really want, and then yeah, you do have the option on the S24. Moving on, of course, the high dynamic range situation. Now this is completely backlit, and this is the kind of shot that really tests the limits of these phones. They're not going to be realistic, no, that's not the purpose for this. It's to test their absolute limits and just how far we can go with these. Clearly, the Pixel seems to be handling most of the shadows well, but doesn't the Pixel look really artifacted? Well, I can tell you it does, because that's not how the wall looks. The S24 is, yes, it's crushing more of the shadows even in the foreground, but it is ensuring that there are no artifacts, no weird amount of grain or noise. So initially you might think the Pixel's better, but no, the S24 is out here crushing shadows strategically and it's pulling ahead. Now with the ultrawide camera, it's the exact same situation, because you see, we get more shadow detail and more vibrance on the S24 Ultra. On the Pixel, it's the exact opposite. You get more contrast, which I prefer, and we also get less saturation and more natural color tones in general, which I also prefer. So the Pixel is really playing into my personal preferences. But of course, you can really go for whichever one you want. It is a personal preference after all. Now with the backlit ultrawide, see now, the Pixel is somehow able to handle the shadows much better. There's no artifacting, nothing. It is giving you more detail in the shadows. It has a much more natural looking sky as opposed to the weird blue color that we're getting on the S24. And with the shadows being well exposed without any artifacting, it just makes me naturally lean towards the Pixel. Now with the ultrawide, we can also use macro. And that's the only option we have on both, which is good. It's really good macro that we have, you can tell. But the thing is this, almost every other smartphone that I've used this year, like the Vivo X100 Pro, the Xiaomi 14 Ultra, they can all use telephoto cameras for their macro shots. And that makes it exceptional, because there's just a different kind of look to it. And the fact is this, I prefer telephoto macros over the ultrawide macros. It's just better quality that we get most of the time. And it's just, I kind of expect a little bit more from these phones in terms of options, because they do cost like 2.5 kidneys. But anyways, let's move on to zoom. Now this is a regular main camera shot, nothing too crazy, but I do gotta admit, there are a lot of times when the S24 Ultra can have a tendency to really give you a bluish sky. And it doesn't look right, especially in this case when it's completely overcast. I kinda expect the almost grayish tones that we get on the Pixel, but I think what we all care about is the 2x sensor crop on both phones. Now the S24 does have a really nice looking sensor crop, so well, there's only one thing we can do. We can crop in all the way to 500% and figure out exactly which one's better. Well, there's really no difference, is there? Well, nothing tangible at least. Yeah, some lines are more visible on the S24, while in other lines' cases, I guess it's on the Google. But yeah, you're not gonna have any issues. That's basically what I'm trying to say. The 2x sensor crop does work. Now for 3x, now see, this is where the S24's advantage comes in. It does have an additional telephoto camera. May not be the highest quality, best bloody 3x camera that we have. And as opposed to not having a telephoto camera, yeah, technically it is giving you more detail, but this is the thing that I mentioned. The quality of the 3x telephoto, not really up there. There's way better cameras that I've used with 3x capabilities that just look at the amount of grain you're getting. That's all I need to say. Moving on, however, to 5x. Now the 5x sensor on the S24 Ultra is supposedly good. It is high resolution, it is a larger sensor that we're getting. I just wish we had the same higher quality sensors on both the 3x and the ultrawide camera on the S24 Ultra. But anyway, moving on to 10x, and see, this is where there's a pretty significant difference. At 10x at the very least, it does appear that the S24 is sharpening things a lot. I can see some over sharpening happening, but it is bringing out a lot of detail. Also, the color of the building, I believe it is more natural on the S24 Ultra as opposed to what's happening on Google. At 30x, oddly enough, it completely switches roles, which really doesn't make much sense, but that's just the way it goes. Because now, the S24 Ultra is looking way softer and almost as if the noise reduction is working overtime here. The Pixel is now sharpening things a lot, and it is also, as a result, bringing out a lot more of the details. It's not going to be perfect on either phone, but comparatively speaking, I think the Pixel is doing a slightly better job. And then of course we got the high-res options. Now, this is just 50 megapixels. I say just, but yeah, the S24 is packing a whole lot here. Now for 50 megapixels, I would say the Pixel is doing a slightly better job. Just look at the text. You can see it's just a little bit better preserved and it doesn't look as artifacted around the edges. But of course, we would be remiss if you were to just ignore the 200 megapixels on the S24, right? Now look, I understand that at this point, you probably understand that the 200 megapixels is more than likely a gimmick, and most of the time you're not going to use it. But well, this is a comparison after all. And so cropping all the way in, and yeah, see, I can still notice that artifacting happening right around the edges on the S24, even with 200 megapixels. It's still not gone. That processing artifact is still there. The Pixel, on the other hand, is just doing a better job at this point, isn't it? So, is it really worth using 200 megapixels? I would say not. Moving on, however, to our good old-fashioned ultrawide cameras. Now, the ultrawide on the S24 is the most basic that you could ever hope for. And yeah, I know I messed up the framing, can't do anything about it now, can I? But then when we crop in, you see, now I need to eat my words because I did say it was basic on the S24. I never said it didn't keep up. Because the Pixel's ultrawide, at least when there's good enough amount of light, it performs basically as well, or rather I should say the S24's ultrawide performs as well as the Pixel's, even with high res. Now yeah, there's a bit more sharpening, bit more artifacting, haloing happening on the S24. It's a minor difference, but is there will come a time when the ultrawide on the S24 will falter. We'll get to it. But first, the 5x 50 megapixels. Now this is something we have on both phones, and I believe this is an upgrade that the Pixel got with its telephoto camera, as well as crop in. And yeah, it's basically the same. I guess the Pixel has a little bit more sharpening going on and also a little bit more detail. Just look at the creases right around the word black, and you can kind of see more of that action happening as opposed to the S24 Ultra. It is the smallest bloody difference that I could hope for, but it is a difference. However, let us move on to selfies. Now this is where things are going to get interesting. First and foremost, it was so dark and so overcast that we had the streetlights come on at I believe like 4:30 or 5 in the evening. That's just to give you an idea of just how weirdly dark it is these days, and I love it, of course. But it's also the reason why I've been taking backlit shots indoors. Now, to be completely honest, I think the Pixel is just a little bit better simply because it has a significantly wider field of view. Personally, I prefer that a lot. But the S24, it does give you an overall cleaner result. More often than not, I do prefer the skin tones that we get from the S24, at least in overcast conditions. The Pixel does seem to have a little too much magenta most of the time. It's not that big a difference or that big a deal, to be completely honest, but it is something to keep in mind. However, with this borderline insane backlit shot, there's a lot to unpack because just take a look at it. The Pixel, it is handling the background highlights flawlessly. You have all the details in the clouds and the buildings, everything is perfectly kept. You have good contrast on my face, which is surprising in the most pleasant way possible. Maybe it's not the biggest difference in the world, but to be honest, with everything else, the Pixel just taking a win. For portrait selfies, now this is where things take a turn. Very drastically, might I add, because the Pixel's portrait mode is by far one of the worst. And this is that weird, ridiculous little weakness on the Pixel 9 Pro XL, because portrait mode is so vehemently dependent on processing, and the Pixel prides itself on processing, but somehow its edge detection is some of the absolute worst that I've ever seen. Now this one is very difficult because of just how diverse the background is. Even the S24 Ultra, which almost never screws up, is struggling a little bit, you can tell. Right around my hair especially. But the Pixel has way more of these issues, and all around my face I can see some small defects here and there, and it really takes you out of it. And then finally, for our backlit portrait, now I must say, the S24 Ultra's selfies do seem to suffer a little from dynamic range issues. Like the dynamic range on the Pixel is worthy of an applause right there. Like that is fantastic. It's not perfect, it does have a lot of artifacting. If you look at my sleeve, there's this weird purple tint coming in and all that jazz, but that HDR is something else. Also remember, the edge detection is complete trash. I mean, it's removing part of my cheek. At this point, that's a personal attack. Anyways, with night selfies. Now you see, on the S24 Ultra, you have some of the best night selfies that you can take. Now it does look a little bit smeary, probably because I wasn't really holding the camera quite as still as I probably should have. That's on me. But the overall quality is still better than whatever the Pixel is trying to produce. I mean, we have a whole bunch of weird artifacting going on right around my face and my neck, and it just looks horrifying. And the exact same can be said for night selfie portraits. The Pixel does take a night selfie portrait with a long exposure, and once again the S24 Ultra, you know, I think if the S24 had any place to improve in these particular shots, it would be that there's a lot of motion blur that it catches. But anywho, let's move on to portraits themselves. Now, portraits are, at this point, it shouldn't be a surprise. The portraits are complete and utter garbage on the Pixel 9 Pro XL. It is sad, it is horrible, but that's just the way it goes. Because, once again, edge detection. Just take a look at how perfect the S24 Ultra looks, even with a very complex background. And look at the Pixel. Also, you are stuck with a 1.5x crop on the Pixel's main sensor. You don't get to use a 1x, no, we don't deserve it. Anywho, with this backlit portrait, I'd once again say the S24 Ultra could really use a little bit of work with the dynamic range situation. Like, look at how perfectly the Pixel is handling the situation. Also, how is it that in a crazy backlit situation, the Pixel's edge detection somehow manages to work? I mean, look at this. The edge detection issues are immediately obvious. And yeah, this is a 2x option, 50mm from both phones. Yes, you do get a 2x option on the Pixel, but you don't get a 1x. Remind me, do we have a 2x telephoto camera, or is it a 1x main camera? Then for 3x, yes, you can digitally zoom all the way to 3x on the Pixel as well. And yeah, I know the framing isn't perfect, but it doesn't really matter. At the end of the day, the S24 Ultra's quality overall is just significantly ahead. I will say, the S24 does seem to be warming me up a little too much, maybe, but with just the perfect edge detection that it has, I don't really have anything to complain about. And then finally, 5x. You can't use the 5x telephoto camera that we do have on the Pixel 9 Pro XL for taking portraits. That is just, think about it for a second. We can't use the 1x main camera and the 5x telephoto camera for portraits. The two optical zoom ranges that we have, we can't use those for portraits. That's precious. Look, I don't know whoever it was that decided on this, but yeah, adventurous stuff right here, to say the least. Anyways, with night portraits, I'd say night portraits actually do work out quite nicely on the Pixel 9 Pro XL. Weirdly enough, the edge detection isn't as bad as I had thought it would be. There are some problems, but it's not nearly as bad as I'd hoped. The S24 on the other hand, it does appear to have some noise reduction action happening, like my face looks very smooth on the S24. The Pixel does appear to be bringing out some minor levels of detail, but yeah, it's not perfect on either. Who knows, maybe I just went a little too dark there. However, with the regular night mode situation, now see, this is where things are going to be interesting. Now, previously, in the previous comparison, we talked about how you can have some high-res options on the Pixel 9 Pro XL when you're taking night mode shots, which is a very interesting phenomenon to say the least, because that's not something I've seen before. On the S24, you don't have any such options, and to be honest, I'm not the biggest fan of the S24 Ultra because it gives you very bright shadows and a really blue sky in most cases. In this case, I'd say even the Pixel is doing a blue sky. However, let's crop into 500% and set a benchmark, shall we? Now the S24 is horribly oversharpened. I don't like that. Personally, that's too much for me. The Pixel does have sharpening, but it is controlling it really well. I mean, look at it. At 500%, you can barely see sharpening, especially for night mode shot. This is a really nice balance that it's got. It's better than in most cases that I've seen, especially against the S24 Ultra. However, you do get that 50 megapixel mode. Now, in the previous comparison, I had noticed that when you have a good amount of light on the subject, like if you were to shoot something that is lit well during nighttime, then you can get a really nice and detailed result. But what happens in this particular case where the lighting isn't perfect? Well, here's what I can tell you. The S24 still looks kind of like trash, but the Pixel does seem to have gone down in sharpening, but the details aren't really being brought out all that much. There's a little bit of smudging in the darkest shadows. It's a minor difference, but if you really hate sharpening, I guess in any kind of situation with the main cameras at the very least, you can take a high-res shot and be assured that you won't have sharpening problems. Anyway, moving on to this one. Now see, this was a challenge, as you can probably tell. The Pixel, I had actually expected it to do a better job than this because, as you can tell, the S24 Ultra is handling the highlight a little bit better as opposed to the Pixel. Also, the sky. Now the sky is just bad on the S24 Ultra. There is so much artifacting and this weird purplish blue that is giving me, and suffice to say, that's not how it looked. And now finally, let us check out good old-fashioned ultra low light. Once again, this is basically here to benchmark these cameras. This is not realistic, it's not meant to be. It's meant to test the limits. They are both struggling. The Pixel does seem to have slightly higher detail while the S24 Ultra, yes, it has more brightness, but also significantly more artifacting. Just look at the purple tint that's happening on the table. I don't know where that came from. Now you can max out the night mode on both phones, and the Pixel's sharpness did improve a pinch when it took a 6-second exposure. The S24 decided to take a bloody 8-second exposure. Can you imagine that 8 seconds? It was a nightmare. I think it actually made the image worse. It gave you a little bit more detail, but the artifacting spread throughout like a bloody disease of some sort because just damn, the amount of purple in this image is unheard of. Anyways, let's now move on to the ultrawide camera. Now this is where things will be a little bit more interesting because, as you can tell, the Pixel just performs better. Look at the sky. The S24 has this weird green tint happening. It's got a whole vignette going on and it looks bad on the S24 Ultra. Simple as that. The Pixel looks pretty much perfect. Once again, just remember just how nice the sky looks here. And yes, we are going to crop in and we are going to check out the details at 12 megapixels because the Pixel does give you the option for 50 megapixels on all of its cameras with night mode. Again, not something I've used before. To be honest, I think the S24 does give you more detail, but also about a truckload more sharpening. It's basically like how it was with the main camera, but I do think that the sharpening actually brings out more detail in this case, as opposed to the Pixel, which does seem to be lacking detail in that regard. It is all sharpened detail on the S24, I do want to clarify. But of course, we do get that 50 megapixel mode on the Pixel. Does it actually work or do anything? And yes, the sky does look significantly more artifacted this time around. And cropping in, you do get slightly more detail, but there's also more mushiness going on in some of the edges, especially in the shadows. And I'm also seeing more grain. So it's a bit of a trade-off here. You're gonna get overall more artifacting, so my personal recommendation would just be never to use 50 megapixels with ultrawide, because the ultrawide image does diminish in overall quality. Anywho, here's another ultrawide shot, and see, once again, the S24 Ultra is just better at handling highlights. Just take a look at the streetlights, it's better at that. But the colors are going way too crazy. It's too damn saturated on the S24 Ultra, and also the sky, it's better this time around, but I can still see a pinch of green tint happening right around the edges, and the vignette is just crazy. And now finally we have the zoom test. Now this is a 1x shot, and once again I took the 50 megapixel shot on the Pixel 9 Pro XL, because this time we have a subject in good lighting, and that does make a heck of a lot of difference, because just look at how much more detail we're getting on the Pixel this time around. So here's my conclusion. With the main camera on the Pixel 9 Pro XL, if you want to use 50 megapixel mode, make sure that your subject is in decent amount of light, even with night mode enabled. It's gonna give you exceptional results like this one, because just look at the difference between the S24 and the Pixel here. It's really something else. But if the lighting goes down, the quality will plummet. With the 2x, now this is where things will get interesting. So 2x is supposed to be a sensor crop on both. It usually suffers a lot at night. Now I would say both are very similar, but the S24 does seem to have more artifacting and sharpening action happening, which is a little unfortunate, but yeah, the Pixel does take a slight win in here. Then of course 3x. 3x is optical zoom on the S24 Ultra, but in a lot of cases, actually the S24 doesn't use the 3x, because the 3x's sensor quality sucks balls. And I guess this time it did use the 3x. It's probably because this was a technically well-lit subject, given the night mode conditions. And of course the Pixel doesn't really stand a chance. Regardless, it's not going to be able to do much of anything in this case. That's usually just the way it rolls. Now, here, notice something. With the 5x, you can once again use the 50 megapixel mode, but take a look at that background. It is horrendous. It's a crime to have that much amount of artifacting in a shot, especially because the S24 is also taking a 5x shot and it is producing a fairly clean image, which is why I would recommend to never use 50 megapixels even with the 5x, because even in a fairly decent condition like this, we were getting so much artifacting, and with the regular 12 megapixel mode, it's perfect. This is exactly what you want. And of course, we gotta crop in, right? Well, it's damn, that looks like an oil painting if I've ever seen one. Now trust me, I have seen a lot of them. S24 Ultra does seem to have a lot of natural detail. I think this time the Pixel's processing just decided that we should zoom in from the 1x all the way to 5x instead of trying to use the 5x telephoto. I'm not sure why that happened. It usually takes a 5x telephoto at night, but it didn't, and clearly it's not doing a good job now, is it? And so with that said, we are at the end of this comparison. I did tell you, didn't I? There are some weird limitations in both these phones. The Pixel, on one hand, so processing heavy, it's got incredible software, so on and so forth, yada yada yada. But somehow, it can't do portrait mode. It needs better software tuning. And that's the weird thing. Google is supposed to be the king of software, so where is it? However, for the S24 Ultra, now software is not supposed to be the strongest suit on the S24. It's supposed to be hardware. It does have an additional 3x camera. Not the best camera in the world, but it's still there, and it does produce better images in most cases as opposed to the Pixel. However, its ultra-wide camera sucks balls. That's a fact. I mean, you saw those images. Even with regular outdoors night mode shots, it couldn't handle itself. There's a whole bunch of artifacting and over sharpening, and it looks bad. I think the ultrawide camera is like the second most used camera after the main camera, so why is such an important camera not good? The contradictions are delicious, aren't they? Well, with that said, I do hope you guys enjoyed, found this helpful, and well, there's not really much of a conclusion here. It's just, pick your own poison. There are problems on both phones, and choose whichever one suits better. That's the best way to put it. I'll see you guys tomorrow with more. Cheers.